Welcome back, everyone. I hope you've been enjoying this whole conference series, Research Works, here at EACD Slovenia 2023. I certainly have, and I've been sitting in on lovely presentations, but I've been able to talk to so many people about their work too, and I think that's been so fabulous. I do have a wonderful guest to present to you guys today. She actually presented in the same segment as myself, and it was just incredible. Everyone talked about how beautiful the presentation was, and so we obviously just had to get her onto this show. So I would love to introduce you all now to Amy de Roubaix. I felt like I said it better before in my head. A PhD candidate from Ghent University. Welcome, and sorry. I think
no, it was perfectly
it was
fine.
Okay. All very, very polite. Like I said, normally Ash is here with me, and Ash does all the pronunciations much better than I. So look, I'm trying. But it's been so lovely to be able to meet people who have got such wonderful, just amazing passion for areas of research, and the area that you presented was absolutely incredible, because I think we've talked a lot about, cerebral palsy at this conference, but increasingly we're talking about different groups. And your presentation was titled The Impact of Developmental Coordination Disorder, Preliminary Results in Belgium. Tell me, how did you come to this place to study in this particular area?
Well, I always wanted to work with children, and I wanted to do something scientific. Yeah. So the area of physiotherapy was perfect for that, because you have some science and you have the possibility to work with children.
Yeah. It's the perfect job, really.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I think in my third year, I first had classes about developmental coordination disorder by my first promoter, Hilva Walvalde. Right. And I was fascinated about the topic, just children who are clumsy, and they're there, and there's many of them. Yeah. And people don't know. Yeah. Because people know ADHD, people know autism, people know dyslexia, but they don't know DCD. But this one is way more often, it occurs way more often than the other ones.
Yeah. So, what is the occurrence?
It's 5 to 6%.
5 to 6%. So when you consider in a classroom setting, I love how you asked that question at the beginning of your presentation. What was the question that you asked? Well, a good way to say it.
Do you remember that one classmate that always is picked last in gym class because they can't catch a ball, or those who always spill their drinks, or those who always bump into others?
Yeah. Yep.
Those are the kids that might have DCD.
Yeah, yep. And I love how you asked that question, because I think so many of us can relate to that.
Exactly. Right? That was the point of that question.
It was beautiful. It was so beautiful. And I think that's the point, because I think developmental coordination disorders had many names. I think it's been called many different things. I think that's made it difficult, I guess, to come around it and understand the condition. Yes. What else has it been called over time?
Well, it's had horrible names. It's been called clumsy child syndrome.
Oh my goodness.
It's been called minimal brain damage. There have been several other names for it, but it was in 1987 that they first used the name developmental coordination disorder. Wow. And nowadays, many people still use dyspraxia. As a term for DCD. Okay. But there was a consensus to use the term DCD preferably. But it's still being used a lot, the name of dyspraxia.
Wow. So how does someone come about to getting a diagnosis? I imagine that it's very symptomatic. So you might just notice a lot of this, like you said, like the clumsy sort of symptoms. How does one then kind of go, is this actually a diagnosis, or is it just this person?
Yeah. That's something that parents say a lot. Well, I was like that. So what could be wrong? Yep. Or he's just tall, or he was from the end of the year, so he's just a little bit younger. Yep. And so therefore he is a little bit more clumsy. Yeah. But it turns out that for many of these children, there's an explanation for it, and it's that they have DCD. So what happens a lot of the times is that parents start to recognize some things. They see that their child is clumsy, and it's when it starts to affect their self-esteem, or when school starts to complain that the child cannot catch up or cannot keep up at school. That's when parents really start to worry and start to get into services to get a diagnosis.
Right. And the process of getting a diagnosis, who would do that?
That depends on the country.
Okay.
It should be a doctor.
Okay.
So that's the same in every country.
Okay.
But it's a bit tricky. because each country has their own specialists for that.
Sure, okay.
So it can be a pediatrician, it can be a child neurologist, it can be a physician.
Okay.
Yeah, but there should be an OT or a PT that looks at motor development, and then a doctor that can exclude that there is anything neurological or another condition that can explain those motor difficulties.
Okay. So I suppose from there, you described a lot. Well, what you presented was really quite incredible in terms of what it is that affects children, how we can see it. What the part that I want to pull out first, because it's always in front of my head, is the difference between male and female and how frequently they are diagnosed in either. Can you talk us through that a little bit more?
Yeah. So literature says that there's 3 boys for 1 girl with DCD, but the question is it really like that? Because what we saw in autism happen as well is that the children, the girls are under-identified because they can compensate a little bit better because we have different expectations from them. And it's exactly the same when we look at motor development. Boys that can't catch a ball or boys that can't kick a ball, you will notice them much earlier than those girls because girls can sit at the side of the playground and they can read books and they can play with dolls and you won't necessarily see
acceptable.
That. You won't see that they're clumsy and you won't be worried that they're sitting there. While if that's a boy who's doing that, people sometimes are alerted sooner.
Yeah, it's such an interesting point, isn't it? And I remember, you're so true about autism. I know ADHD is the same too. I think a lot of females get diagnosed older because they've been masking. So it's such an interesting area when it comes to that. So back to, I guess, more of the preliminary results that you had actually set out to accomplish, to find out. What was your main aim of what you were trying to do in this particular study?
Well, we wanted to map the impact that DCD has on the child and its family. And it's an international study, so it was first started in Australia by Professor Melissa Lissari. And so other countries picked up the topic and picked up the study and started doing them in their own countries because obviously the trajectories of getting a diagnosis and the cultural differences they're present there. So we need to culturally adapt it. And we can also see differences across countries because we don't all get the same results when it comes to diagnostic trajectories and information resources and therapy possibilities.
Sure. And I know that we don't have time to go through all of your results because you had a lot of results, but there'll be some things that you found particularly interesting that came out of this. What are some of those things that really stood out for you?
Well, it has been described in qualitative literature, but it has not been measured in quantitative numbers, and that's the incontinence or the potty training difficulties.
Wow.
So half of the parents indicated difficulties with potty training and incontinence, and 1 out of 4 of those children still had difficulties or had accidents during the day after 5 years of age. And 40% still had bedwetting after 5 years of age. So that's a high number. And that's an issue. And it's important to talk about this because parents do not relate this to DCD. And parents don't talk about this as easy as the other topics. So we need to be aware of this. And as a physiotherapist or an OT, you need to ask about this because we can support those children with those difficulties.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think that's such a good point to raise because we don't often relate that, is it? And if someone might not have, or a child, like you said, might not have a diagnosis yet, but they might seek help from an OT or physio, if we ask these questions, we can help facilitate that process. Because those are quite high numbers.
Yeah, and it's the first time we have this number because this question was actually not in the initial questionnaire. We kind of added it because we saw that coming forward in our interview study.
Interesting.
So I wanted to add that question together with the other questions that I presented about the articulation and speech difficulties.
Let's talk about that more because I found that really interesting too.
Yes. Well, we know that DCD often co-occurs and it also often co-occurs with speech language disorders. But yet we saw that the prevalence of those difficulties that parents reported regarding articulation and speech percentage were higher than we would expect in a typically developing sample. We have not tested it on a typically developing sample.
Okay.
So we cannot know for sure. But it is something that we need to be mindful of, together with the sleeping difficulties that were also reported, and the emotional difficulties, but that we know. That we know, but it's important to emphasize this, because this is what affects their future way more than their motor difficulties. If they have good self-esteem, if they grow up to be confident adults, then they have a good quality of life. So we really, really need to invest in how they feel and support them, so they don't feel dumb. And they don't feel stupid, because they are not. They are clever and they're creative, and they're so good at finding creative solutions and persevering to reach their goals. And we need to acknowledge that.
Well, that is so beautiful. And I think that's absolutely true, isn't it? Because I think when you are on this journey to sort of find out and understand what's wrong, you end up going down the path of like, what can't they do? What are they having a lot of difficulty with? It can gear everything really negatively. But you're absolutely right, because the problem solving required to, when you don't have the answers, to function every single day, to fit in and be part of your community and your group, takes a lot of perseverance.
It does.
And like you said, creativity and problem solving.
Yeah. They're very good at this. And sometimes this can cause struggles at school as well, because they find a creative solution, but it's not the way that the teacher wants it to be. And so then they have to do it the way the teacher teaches it. But that's a pity, because they are so creative. And
it can be too rigid, and we need more flexibility in the way that we think. That's such an important point. Was there anything I found? It seems that what you found, there was a lot of things that were surprising. Was there anything else that surprised you about your results, or things that you weren't expecting, or anything that really stood out to you?
I was not expecting those high results for potty training.
Of course,
But I also found it interesting to look at the influence on the family itself, because we know that it influences the family, but it's interesting to see what areas are being influenced. And we see that parents go to work less. They often just don't work anymore, or go to work part-time to support their child. And then there's the financial costs that come into the picture as well. And also what I found really frightening almost is that 1 out of 4 had to repeat at least 1 year of school. And this is it's a problem.
It is. It's hard to put that into words, actually, in terms of what that means. There's so many challenges there. Wow.
Yeah, and we see it more often in those children with other co-occurring conditions and those with a slightly lower family income. But still, even when there's no co-occurring conditions, or when the family income is like average, then we still see an elevated number.
That's really truly incredible. What's your main take home from this in terms of what we need to really do now to move forward? I feel like some of them are kind of obvious because you've highlighted them already, but you had a great sort of summary slide that brought it all together. Do you mind talking us through some of those things? Because it really was wonderful.
Yeah, sure. So what we really need to remember is that the difficulties that kids with DCD have every day, they go beyond the motor domain. It's not just motor difficulties. And they have the strengths that we can build upon. So we need to use them. We need to acknowledge them. We need to support parents. Because there was a high demand of parents for more support to be able to better assist their child with their movement difficulties. And finally, we need to raise awareness. We need to educate people that DCD is real. It exists. Many people have it. And we need to acknowledge their difficulties and their strengths. And we really need to make everyone aware that this exists, because we saw that doctors kind of knew about it, but then when looking at school personnel and looking outside in the community, too little people knew DCD.
That's right. I do remember that slide. That was a great slide. It was you sort of went through how many people actually knew what DCD was. So the top 3, you would hope they would know. But then you had this whole group of people who it was quite low numbers, like 1 in 10 almost. So
that was the friends and family.
That was friends and family.
So the general community, they don't know the condition.
Wow.
And that makes it hard for parents as well, because they receive the diagnosis, they talk about it to friends and family, and they're like, what is this thing? I don't know this thing. I know ADHD, I know ASD, but I don't know DCD. And then parents have to explain over and over and over again what exactly that is. And that's really frustrating and tiring for parents.
Yeah, of course it is. Gosh, I think from there's so many practical things. You're talking about our role as health professionals in education, providing information, support. What other sort of real practical things, with your background as a physiotherapist too, what are some of the practical things that you would encourage people to do if they have a child on their caseload with DCD? What sort of things can we do?
It's really about supporting the child in everyday activities.
Okay.
So we don't want to go for normality. We just want to be able for them to reach whatever it is that they want.
Yeah.
So we pick out specific goals that they want to train on, and then we help them with that.
Yeah.
And before, like many years ago, we used to focus on the processes underlying motor activities, such as balance, such as tone, such as coordination, and we used to do these cross exercises of like tapping your head while moving around,
exercises.
these kind of things. But we now know that they don't work. They're not what we have to do with kids with DCD. We have to work task-oriented. We have to work on what they find important. And we have to educate parents and the teachers and the whole context around the child, actually, because that's where the child is going to be every day. And that's where they need the understanding. And that's where they need the support, because parents need to know that their child will probably always be a little slow. They will always have some difficulties when they learn new skills, and it's perfectly okay. They're going to get there, but we need to give them some time, and we need to continue supporting them and just
that's lovely.
Build on their strengths as well.
So I think that's where, from a beyond a diagnosis perspective, we're still talking about these crucial things that we can be doing in our practice, being goal-directed, being very task-specific. Like you said, I love how you brought that up. I do remember learning that at university many years ago, where, if you have coordination, you can, there's a lot of things I can't do myself, but we expect our children who have DCD to do these activities, but they can't translate them to real life because they're not task-specific. And so that context and environment, I love that you've highlighted that too.
It's really important.
Yeah, it's so great. Well, Amy, congratulations on this huge body of work that you've been embarking on. All the best for the remainder of your time as a PhD candidate. Enjoy the journey.
Thank you.
And it was just lovely for you to spend some time with us and talk us through this really incredible piece of work that you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And on the last day as well. On the third day. So it's absolutely fabulous. To all of our listeners, I hope you really enjoyed that as much as I did. Stay tuned for so much more, but make sure you head to our website, researchworks.net, where we'll have some links there for you too. So I'll talk to you all again really soon. Bye.